The first gunshot nearly grazed Clara Norwood's cheek as she ducked behind the stagecoach, her heart pounding like a stampede against her ribs. 3 days into her journey west, and already she was caught in a robbery that threatened to take what little she had left in this world. Colorado Territory, 1875. The promise of a new beginning had drawn Clara from Boston after her parents' deaths left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. Now, as the bandits ransacked the stagecoach and took the other passengers' valuables, she clutched her mother's locket, the only item of worth she owned, and prayed they wouldn't find her hiding spot. "Check under the coach," a gruff voice commanded. Clara held her breath, her fingers digging into the dusty earth beneath her. At 22, she'd never imagined she would die in a nameless stretch of wilderness, so far from the brick-lined streets she once called home. The sound of boots crunching on gravel grew closer. Then came the thunder of hoofbeats, followed by more gunfire. The bandits scattered, shouting curses as a group of riders descended upon them. Through the chaos, Clara remained frozen, unsure if these newcomers were saviors or a different kind of threat. "Miss, you can come out now. They're gone." The voice was deep but gentle. Clara peered out to see a tall man extending his hand toward her. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concern evident in his blue eyes as he helped her to her feet. "No, I'm fine," Clara stammered, brushing dust from her travel-worn dress. "Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Abram Montgomery," he replied, removing his hat briefly. "Ranch owner about 15 miles west of here. My men and I were bringing cattle to the rail station when we heard the commotion." Clara noticed the other riders rounding up the remaining bandits while the stagecoach driver tended to a wounded passenger. "Clara Norwood," she offered with a slight curtsy, a habit from her Boston upbringing that seemed oddly formal in these wild surroundings. "I was traveling to Silver Creek to seek employment." Abram's expression shifted slightly. "Silver Creek's had a rough year. Droughts dried up most jobs." "What kind of work were you hoping to find?" Clara's confidence faltered. The little money she had would only last another week at most. "I was told there's a hotel there in need of help. I can cook, clean, so anything really." The driver approached them, his face grim. "Coach ain't going nowhere today, folks. Wheels damaged and Johnson there needs a doctor for his shoulder." He gestured to the wounded passenger. "We're 10 miles from Silver Creek and 12 from the nearest ranch." "My ranch is closer," Abram offered. "You can all come there. We'll send for the doctor and get word to Silver Creek about the coach." As the others prepared to move, Clara realized her predicament was worsening by the minute. She approached Abram, who was saddling an extra horse for the wounded passenger. "Mr. Montgomery," she began, her voice barely audible over the prairie wind. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Mr. Montgomery, I wonder if, that is." Her voice shook as she finally asked, "Would you have any need for help at your ranch, any work at all?" Abram stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. His eyes, the color of a clear mountain lake, studied her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Miss Norwood," he said after a long moment, "I need a wife more than a worker." Clara's mouth fell open in shock. I beg your pardon," the hint of a smile touched his lips. "That came out wrong. What I meant is, I don't need hired help. What my ranch needs is a woman's touch, a proper homemaker." He gestured to the vast landscape around them. "This territory isn't kind to single women without connections or protection. The hotel in Silver Creek closed down 3 months ago." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Every plan she had made, every hope for independence, seemed to be crumbling. "I see," she managed to say, fighting back tears of frustration. "Well, thank you for your honesty, Mr. Montgomery." Something in her expression must have moved him because his voice softened. "Listen, I have a proposition. Come to the ranch as my guest. Stay until you figure out your next move. My sister lived there until she married last spring, so there's a room ready. No strings attached." Clara hesitated. Accepting charity from a stranger went against everything she'd been raised to believe, yet her options were vanishing like morning mist under the harsh western sun. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Abram shrugged. "Because out here we help each other survive. That's the code of the West." He offered her the reins of a chestnut mare. "Besides, my cook makes the best stew this side of the Mississippi. One taste, and you might decide ranch life suits you after all." Something about his easy confidence and the genuine kindness in his eyes made Clara take the reins. As she mounted the horse with his assistance, she couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected detour might lead somewhere she never anticipated. "I accept your hospitality, Mr. Montgomery," she said formally, "but only until I can arrange alternative employment." "Fair enough," he replied, mounting his own horse. "Though I warn you, Miss Norwood, the West has a way of changing people's plans." As they rode toward the horizon, Clara glanced at the rugged man beside her. Despite her determination to maintain her independence, she couldn't deny a flutter of curiosity about this cowboy who had rescued her from bandits, only to offer her sanctuary with no apparent motive beyond kindness. What she didn't know was that Abram Montgomery had his own reasons for bringing a city woman to his struggling ranch reasons that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with survival. The Montgomery Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres of rolling hills and valleys, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. As they approached after nearly 2 hours of riding, Clara was struck by the beauty of the place, despite signs of the drought Abram had mentioned. The main house was larger than she expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. "It's not what you're used to in Boston," Abram said, noticing her appraising gaze, "but it's home." "It's impressive," Clara replied honestly. "Did you build it yourself?" "My father did, with help from the men who worked for him. I added the 2nd story after he passed." Pride tinged his voice as they dismounted in front of the house. Several ranch hands approached to take their horses, eyeing Clara curiously. A heavy-set woman with gray-streaked hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Montgomery, we weren't expecting you back till sundown." Her eyes fell on Clara. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Diaz, this is Miss Clara Norwood. She'll be staying with us for a while." "The stagecoach was attacked. We brought the injured to the bunkhouse. Can you send for Doc Peterson?" "Of course," Mrs. Diaz said, already turning to dispatch one of the ranch hands. "I'll prepare a room for Miss Norwood. Use Margaret's old room," Abram instructed before turning to Clara. "Mrs. Diaz is our housekeeper and the finest cook in the territory. You're in good hands with her." Clara followed Mrs. Diaz inside, immediately noticing the contrast between the rugged exterior and the surprisingly refined interior. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, if not fashionable by Boston standards. What caught her attention were the small touches that spoke of a woman's influence: embroidered cushions, carefully arranged wildflowers in pottery vases, and landscape paintings adorning the walls. "Your sister has excellent taste," Clara commented as Mrs. Diaz led her upstairs. "Miss Margaret made this place shine," the housekeeper agreed. "Been dull as dirt since she left. Mr. Montgomery works from sunup to sundown, barely notices the dust gathering." She opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with floral curtains and a patchwork quilt on the bed. "Here you are. There's a wash basin on the dresser. I'll bring up some hot water and find you something clean to wear." "Thank you, but I have a change of clothes in my—" Clara stopped, remembering her trunk was still on the stagecoach. Mrs. Diaz nodded understandingly. Mr. Thomas rode back to secure the passengers' belongings. Should return by nightfall. Until then, you can borrow something of Miss Margaret's. You're about her size. Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. She'd nearly been killed, lost her transportation, discovered her job prospect was non-existent, and now found herself dependent on the charity of a man who had joked, at least she hoped it was a joke, about needing a wife. She removed her mother's locket from around her neck, opening it to reveal the miniature portraits of her parents. "What would you advise me to do now?" she whispered to their silent faces. After washing and changing into a borrowed dress that fit surprisingly well, Clara made her way downstairs. She found Abram in what appeared to be a study, bent over account books with a furrowed brow. "Mr. Montgomery," she called softly from the doorway. He looked up, and for a moment, something like appreciation flickered in his eyes before he schooled his features. Miss Norwood, you look rested. Please come in. Clara entered the room, noticing the shelves of books lining one wall. You have quite a library. My father believed education shouldn't stop at the edge of civilization, Abram explained, closing his ledger. Please sit. I imagine you have questions. Clara perched on the edge of a leather chair. I'm grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Montgomery, but I need to understand my situation. If the hotel in Silver Creek is closed, what other employment opportunities exist for a woman of my limited skills? Abram leaned back in his chair, considering her question. The town has a schoolhouse that occasionally needs a teacher, but they've filled the position for now. The general store is run by a family. There's the saloon, but I will not work in a saloon, Clara stated firmly. A smile tugged at Abram's lips. I didn't think you would. He drummed his fingers on the desk. There's a town about 40 miles south that's growing rapidly since the silver mine opened. More opportunities there, perhaps. 40 miles, Clara repeated, calculating how long it would take to save enough for such a journey. Miss Norwood, may I be direct? At her nod, Abram continued, What brings a Boston lady to Colorado territory with apparently no concrete plans or connections? Clara stiffened. My plans were concrete until today, and my reasons for leaving Boston are personal. Fair enough, he conceded. But out here, knowing someone's story can be the difference between offering the right kind of help and making things worse. The sincerity in his voice broke through her reserve. My parents died of influenza last winter. My father's investments had failed, leaving significant debts. The house and everything in it was sold to satisfy the creditors. She straightened her shoulders. I could have sought a position as a governess or companion in Boston, but those roles felt too constrained. I wanted a fresh start somewhere my family's fall from grace wouldn't follow me. Abram nodded slowly. I understand seeking a new beginning. My father came west for the same reason. And did he find what he was looking for? Eventually. It wasn't easy, but he built something lasting. Abram gestured to encompass the ranch. The drought's hitting us hard this year, but we'll survive. We always do. Clara detected a note of worry beneath his confident words. Is the ranch in trouble? Abram hesitated before answering. Nothing I can't handle. The cattle need more water than the creek's providing, so we're digging a new well. Labor costs money we're short on since the beef prices dropped. Hence your joke about needing a wife rather than a worker, Clara said, understanding dawning. A wife wouldn't require wages. Abram had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. It was a poor attempt at humor. Though there's some truth to it, most successful ranches have a partnership at their core. My father and mother built this place together before she passed. My sister helped after that. And now she's gone, leaving you without your partner, Clara finished for him. Their eyes met across the desk, an unexpected moment of connection forming between them. Abram broke it first, standing abruptly. Mrs. Diaz will have dinner ready soon. You should join us. He moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Norwood, I meant what I said about staying as long as you need. There's no rush to figure everything out today. After he left, Clara remained seated, her mind whirling with new possibilities. The ranch clearly needed help, and she needed employment. Perhaps there was a solution that could benefit them both, one that didn't involve marriage, but could still provide her with the independence she craved. Dinner that evening was a livelier affair than Clara expected. The injured passenger, Mr. Johnson, had been treated by the doctor and joined them at the table, along with Mrs. Diaz and the ranch foreman, a weathered man named Frank who had worked for Abram's father since before Abram was born. The bandits were likely Harker's men, Frank was saying as he passed a bowl of potatoes to Clara. They've been getting bolder since the marshal was shot last month. Harker? Clara asked, accepting the bowl. Wesley Harker, Abram explained. Fancies himself a businessman, but he's nothing more than a thief who's managed to avoid hanging. He's been buying up struggling ranches in the territory or taking them when buying doesn't work. He's made offers for this place twice, Frank added. Came himself the second time, all smiles and fancy talk. Clara noticed Abram's jaw tighten. No Montgomery will ever sell to a man like Harker, he knows that. The conversation shifted to pleasanter topics, but but Clara couldn't help wondering if the attack on the stagecoach had been coincidental or somehow connected to this man Harker. As the meal concluded, Mr. Johnson announced his intention to continue to Silver Creek the next day. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Mr. Montgomery," he said. "Besides, I have business that won't wait. I'll have one of my men escort you," Abram offered. He glanced at Clara. "Unless you'd prefer to go to town as well, Miss Norwood." All eyes turned to her, and Clara realized this was a moment of decision. "Actually," she said carefully, "I've been considering a proposition that might be mutually beneficial." Abram raised an eyebrow. "Oh. You mentioned needing help with the ranch, not hired help specifically, but assistance with the household management that your sister previously provided." "That's right," he confirmed, watching her with growing interest. "I propose a trade," Clara continued. "Room and board in exchange for taking over those duties. I can manage the household, oversee meals, maintain the accounts, and free you to focus on the ranch operations. For a trial period, say 3 months. After that, we can reassess." The table fell silent. Clara felt her cheeks warm under their scrutiny but maintained her composure. "You want to be the ranch housekeeper?" Abram asked finally. Clara shook her head. "Not exactly. Mrs. Diaz is clearly excellent at what she does. I'm proposing something more like the role your sister filled, a household manager. In Boston, I assisted my mother in running a home with 12 rooms and hosting social events for my father's business associates. I kept the household accounts and managed the staff." Frank chuckled. "She's got you there, Abram. Place has been running like a wagon with 3 wheels since Margaret left." Abram studied Clara for a long moment. "It's not an easy life, Miss Norwood. The work never ends, the weather can turn deadly in minutes, and the nearest proper town is a half-day's ride." "I'm not afraid of hard work or isolation, Mr. Montgomery." Clara met his gaze steadily. "And it would only be temporary until I save enough to move on or until you find my services unsatisfactory." Another long pause followed before Abram nodded slowly. 3 months then, starting tomorrow." Clara extended her hand across the table. "Do we have an agreement?" Abram's large, calloused hand enveloped hers, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Agreement," he said, his blue eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite identify. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she wondered if she had made a reckless decision. She knew nothing about ranch life beyond what she'd read in dime novels. Yet something about Abram Montgomery and his struggling ranch called to her spirit of determination. Here was a chance to prove to herself more than anyone that she could not only survive but thrive in circumstances far removed from the protected world of her upbringing. As she drifted toward sleep, the memory of Abram's hand holding hers returned unbidden. She pushed the thought away firmly. This arrangement was practical, not personal. The last thing she needed was to develop an attachment to a man who had already hinted at marriage once, however jokingly. Her new beginning would be built on independence, not on becoming someone's wife. But as dreams claimed her, Clara couldn't quite banish the image of intense blue eyes and a gentle smile that seemed to promise safety in a land where such promises were as rare as rain in a drought. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Clara settled into her new role at Montgomery Ranch. Each day brought fresh challenges that tested her adaptability and determination. She woke before dawn to help Mrs. Diaz prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learned to manage household supplies that had to last until the monthly trip to town, and discovered muscles she never knew existed as she helped with chores that would have been delegated to servants in her previous life. What surprised her most was how quickly she came to appreciate the rhythm of ranch life. There was an honesty to the work that she found satisfying, immediate results that could be seen, touched, and sometimes tasted. The endless society rules of Boston seemed distant and artificial compared to the straightforward code of the West. Work hard, keep your word, help your neighbors. "You're not what I expected," Mrs. Diaz commented one morning as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "Most city ladies would have been on the first stagecoach out after seeing how we live." Clara smiled, blowing a stray curl from her forehead. Most city ladies haven't had to sell their mother's wedding china to pay for funeral expenses. The older woman nodded approvingly. Hardship builds character, and you've got plenty of that, Miss Norwood. Abram, too, seemed impressed by her willingness to tackle any task. He had been skeptical at first, watching from a distance as she established her place in the household. But as days turned to weeks, a tentative trust developed between them. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Clara was reviewing the ranch accounts in the study when Abram entered, his expression troubled. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, hovering in the doorway. Clara closed the ledger. "Not at all, I was just finishing." He crossed to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape. "How are the accounts looking?" "Concerning," she admitted. "The drought has increased feed costs significantly, and the lower beef prices mean less income than projected." Abram nodded grimly. "The new well is taking longer than expected. We hit rock that needs blasting, which means more expense we can't afford." Clara hesitated before asking, "Is there any truth to what Mr. Johnson said before he left about banks foreclosing on ranches in the territory?" "Some," Abram acknowledged, turning to face her. "3 ranches south of here have been seized in the past 6 months. 2 were bought by Harker immediately after." "You think he's involved with the banks somehow?" Abram's lips tightened. "I think Harker never misses an opportunity to profit from others' misfortune. The timing is too convenient." Clara studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders and the shadows under his eyes. He had been working from dawn until well after dusk every day, often skipping meals to check on the well progress or ride the boundaries of his property. "When was the last time you had a full night's sleep, Mr. Montgomery?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I'm not sure." "There's always something needing attention." "Then tonight you'll retire at a reasonable hour," Clara stated firmly. "The ranch won't benefit from you working yourself to exhaustion." A hint of amusement crossed his features. "Are you giving me orders, Miss Norwood?" "Practical advice," she corrected with a small smile. "As per our agreement." He moved closer, leaning against the desk where she sat. "And how are you finding our arrangement so far? Any regrets about staying?" Clara considered the question seriously. "None," she answered truthfully. "Though I'm still learning something new every day. Yesterday, Mrs. Diaz had to show me how to properly clean a kerosene lamp without breaking the chimney." "You're doing more than I expected," Abram said quietly. "The men have noticed the improvement in meals, and Frank mentioned you organized the supply shed so efficiently he can actually find things now." "High praise indeed," Clara laughed, feeling an unexpected pleasure at his recognition. Abram's expression softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're different than when you first came here, more at ease." Clara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the nearby lamp. "The West changes people's plans," you said. "Perhaps it changes people too. For the better, I hope." His voice had dropped to a lower register that sent a shiver up her spine. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was prepared to name. Clara broke it first, rising from the chair. "I should check on dinner. Mrs. Diaz is teaching me to make her famous stew." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Mr. Montgomery, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Whatever happens when our 3 months end, I'm grateful for this time." Abram watched her leave, his expression unreadable in the fading light. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Clara was hanging laundry with Mrs. Diaz when she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the east, a rider coming fast. Who could that be? She wondered aloud. Mrs. Diaz squinted against the sun. Trouble likely as not. No one rides that hard with good news. The rider turned out to be the telegraph operator from Silver Creek, a thin young man who practically fell from his horse in his haste to deliver his message, Mr. Montgomery. He called, spotting Abram by the corral. "Urgent telegram from Denver." Clara watched as Abram read the paper, his expression darkening with each line. He dismissed the messenger with thanks and a coin, then strode toward the house, his movements tense. "What is it?" Clara asked as he approached, concern evident in her voice. "The bank is calling in loans early throughout the territory," he said grimly. "Including mine, I have 30 days to pay in full or face foreclosure." Clara gasped. But that's impossible. The next cattle sale isn't for 2 months. Exactly. Abram crumpled the telegram in his fist. This is Harker's doing. He's bought influence at the Territorial Bank somehow. What will you do? Ride to Denver tomorrow, try to negotiate an extension. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Though I doubt it will help if Harker has the bank in his pocket. Then I'll come with you, Clara decided instantly. Abram looked startled. What? No, it's a 3-day journey each way. The trail is rough and potentially dangerous. My father was a banker before his investments failed, Clara explained. I understand financial language and negotiations. I could be useful. It's not proper for an unmarried woman to travel alone with a man for such a distance, Abram argued. Clara raised an eyebrow. I'm already living unchaperoned on your ranch, Mr. Montgomery. I think conventional propriety has little relevance to our situation. A reluctant smile touched his lips. You're determined, aren't you? I've invested a month of my life in this ranch, Clara replied seriously. I'd like to see it survive longer than I do. Their gazes held for a long moment before Abram nodded. We leave at first light. Pack warm clothes. The mountain passes get cold even in summer. As Clara prepared for the journey, she tried to ignore the flutter of excitement beneath her practical considerations. 6 days on the trail with Abram, far from the watching eyes of the ranch, would test the careful boundaries she had established. The man intrigued her more than she cared to admit. With his combination of frontier ruggedness and unexpected education, his driving work ethic and occasional flashes of dry humor. More concerning was her growing attachment to the ranch itself. What had begun as a temporary arrangement was starting to feel like something she would regret leaving when the time came. The realization troubled her. She had come west seeking independence, not to simply trade one form of attachment for another. These thoughts occupied her mind as she packed her saddlebags that evening. Whatever feelings might be developing, she reminded herself the practical reality remained unchanged. The ranch needed immediate financial help, and she needed to secure her future. Those facts would guide her actions in Denver, not the increasingly distracting presence of Abram Montgomery. The journey to Denver proved even more arduous than Clara had anticipated. They rode from sunrise until dusk the first day, following trails that sometimes seemed to exist only in Abram's memory. By nightfall, every muscle in her body ached from hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. We'll camp here, Abram announced, stopping beside a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. There's water for the horses and enough cover if the weather turns. Clara dismounted gingerly, trying not to wince as her feet touched the ground. Abram noticed anyway. First long ride. He asked, a hint of sympathy in his voice. Is it that obvious? She attempted a smile through her discomfort. You've done well, he assured her. Many experienced riders would be complaining by now. They worked together to make camp, with Abram teaching Clara how to unsaddle and brush down her horse, how to gather firewood that would burn cleanly, and how to set up a simple shelter using a canvas tarp. As darkness fell, they sat by the small fire, eating beans and jerky that misses. Diaz had packed for them. The night sounds of the wilderness surrounded them, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and the gentle gurgle of the creek. It's beautiful out here, Clara said softly, looking up at the vast canopy of stars. In Boston, the buildings and gas lamps hide most of the stars. Abram followed her gaze upward. That's one thing I never tire of this sky, makes a man feel small but part of something enormous at the same time. Is that why you stay, despite all the hardships? He considered her question seriously. Partly, there's freedom here you can't find in cities, room to breathe to build something that's truly yours. He poked at the fire with a stick. My father used to say the West isn't just a place, it's a promise. A promise that what matters is what you can do, not who your family was or how much money you have. A promise not always kept, Clara observed. No, Abram agreed, but worth fighting for nonetheless. He looked at her across the fire, his features softened by the flickering light. What about you? If the hotel in Silver Creek had been open, what was your plan? Clara hugged her knees to her chest. Work hard, save money, eventually open a small boarding house of my own, something respectable that would allow me to be self-sufficient. No thoughts of marriage. The directness of the question startled her. I had offers in Boston, none that appealed to me, because they were made to the banker's daughter, not to me, she answered honestly. After my father's disgrace, those suitors disappeared quite rapidly. Abram's expression darkened. Their loss. The simple statement, spoken with such conviction, warmed Clara more than the fire before them. Thank you, she said quietly. Silence fell between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Eventually, Abram stood and stretched. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's ride is through rougher country. Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how alone they were miles from the nearest settlement with only each other to rely on. It was both frightening and exhilarating. Good night, Mr. Montgomery, she said, moving toward the simple shelter he had constructed for her. Abram, he corrected gently. Out here, formality seems rather pointless, don't you think? Clara smiled. Then good night, Abram. Good night, Clara. Her name on his lips sounded like something precious. As she settled into her bedroll, Clara knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained at the ranch was eroding with each mile traveled, each shared meal, each moment of honest conversation. What would remain of their employer-employee arrangement by the time they reached Denver was uncertain. More uncertain still was what would happen when they returned, if they returned with the ranch's future secured, or with dreams shattered by financial reality. The second day of travel brought them into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where the trail narrowed and steepened. Clara's muscles protested the renewed effort, but she found a rhythm that made the riding more bearable. Abram set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the area. My father brought cattle through this pass 20 years ago, he told her as they navigated a particularly challenging stretch. Lost half his herd to a flash flood. Started over with just 30 head and built up from there. He sounds like a remarkable man, Clara commented. Stubborn as they come, Abram replied with fond exasperation. Wouldn't give up on anything once he set his mind to it. A family trait, perhaps, she suggested with a smile. Abram laughed. Guilty as charged. Margaret, my sister, says it's our blessing and our curse. They stopped for a brief midday meal beside a mountain stream, letting the horses rest and drink. As Clara stretched her legs, Abram studied a map he had brought. We're making good time, he said. Should reach Parkerville by nightfall. There's a small inn where we can get proper beds. Clara felt a mixture of relief and disappointment at the news. A real bed sounded heavenly to her aching body, but she had unexpectedly enjoyed their night under the stars. Is Parkerville large enough to have a bank? She asked, thinking ahead to their mission. Small branch office, Abram confirmed. We can ask there about the situation, though I doubt they'll have much influence over decisions made in Denver. They mounted up and continued their journey. As the afternoon progressed, dark clouds gathered over the mountains ahead, bringing a sharp drop in temperature. Storms coming, Abram observed with concern. We need to push harder if we're going to reach town before it hits. They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. Within an hour, they were riding through a cold, driving rain that reduced visibility to mere yards. There's a line shack about a mile ahead, Abram shouted over the wind. Used by rangers and trappers. We'll shelter there. By the time they reached the small cabin, both were soaked to the skin and shivering. The shack was crude but sound a single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden table, and 2 narrow cots. Abram immediately set to work building a fire while Clara tended to the horses in the small attached lean-to. When she returned, dripping and trembling with cold, the cabin was already warming from the crackling fire. You need to get out of those wet clothes, Abram said practically, keeping his back turned as he rummaged through his saddlebags. Here. He handed her a flannel shirt and woolen trousers without looking. They'll be too big, but they're dry. Clara accepted the clothing gratefully. Turn around, please. Once Abram faced the wall, she changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of his oversized clothing. You can turn back now. Abram had changed his own shirt but was still in damp trousers. He glanced at her and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly looked away again. "The storm's getting worse," he observed, moving to the small window. "We won't make Parkerville tonight." Clara joined him at the window, watching lightning illuminate the mountain landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Their shoulders nearly touched in the confined space, and she was acutely aware of his presence. "At least we found shelter," she said, trying to focus on practicalities rather than the warmth radiating from him. "Do you think there's any food here?" A search of the cabin's crude shelves yielded basic supplies left by previous occupants: beans, coffee, salt pork, and hardtack. "Not Mrs. Diaz's cooking," Abram commented as he prepared a simple meal, "but it will keep us from going hungry." They ate in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. The close quarters made their usual careful distance impossible, forcing a new intimacy that neither had anticipated. "Tell me about your sister," Clara said finally, seeking safe conversation. "You mentioned she married last spring." Abram's expression softened. "Margaret is 3 years younger than me, headstrong, intelligent, and utterly fearless. She married a doctor from Denver who came west to establish a practice in growing communities." "You miss her," Clara observed. "Every day," he admitted. "She was my closest friend as well as my sister. After our mother died and father grew ill, she stepped into the role of managing the household while I handled the ranch operations. We were a good team." "Like your parents before you," Clara noted. Abram nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "My mother used to say a ranch needs both roots and wings, the stability to weather hard times and the vision to grow when opportunity presents itself. My father provided the roots, she the wings." "And which are you?" Clara asked softly. His eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable in the firelight. "Roots through and through. Margaret had the wings." Clara felt an unexpected tug at her heart. "Perhaps that's why you and your sister worked well together. She had what you lacked and vice versa." "Perhaps," he agreed, studying her with new interest. "What about you, Clara Norwood? Are you roots or wings?" The question caught her off guard. "I've never thought of myself in those terms. I suppose I've always been searching for where to plant my roots." "And have you found it?" His voice was low, almost intimate. Clara looked away, suddenly afraid of what he might read in her expression. "I don't know yet. It's too soon to tell." The storm chose that moment to crash particularly loudly overhead, making them both jump. Abram rose to add more wood to the fire, breaking the tension that had been building between them. "We should get some rest," he suggested. "The storm might clear by morning, and we'll need an early start to make up lost time." Clara nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure at the return to practicality. They prepared for sleep, each taking one of the narrow cots on opposite sides of the single room. As the fire burned down to embers, casting the cabin in shadows, Clara lay awake listening to the storm and to Abram's steady breathing across the room. She had come west seeking independence, yet here she was, dependent on this man for her very survival in the wilderness. The irony wasn't lost on her. More troubling was the realization that her feelings for Abram were evolving beyond gratitude or professional respect. There was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering dedication to his land and legacy, that called to something deep within her. But what future could there be in such feelings? Even if he shared them, and she had no certainty that he did, their agreement was temporary. In less than 2 months, she would either move on to pursue her original goal of self-sufficiency or renegotiate their arrangement on purely practical terms. Romance had no place in either scenario. With that sobering thought, Clara finally drifted into uneasy sleep, the storm's diminishing fury a counterpoint to her troubled dreams. Morning brought clear skies and a landscape transformed by the storm. They set out early, pushing their horses harder to make up for lost time. By mid-afternoon, they reached Parkerville, a small but growing town nestled in a mountain valley. The local bank manager confirmed their fears. The directive to call in loans had come directly from Denver headquarters, affecting ranchers throughout the territory. "Nothing I can do about it locally," he told them apologetically. "Though between us, it stinks of manipulation. Proper banking doesn't work this way." They spent the night at the town's modest inn, each in separate rooms that felt luxurious after their wilderness accommodations. The following afternoon, they arrived in Denver, a bustling city that seemed to have sprung fully formed from the mountainous landscape. "It's changed so much since I was last here," Abram remarked as they rode down a wide street lined with substantial brick buildings. 2 years ago, half these businesses didn't exist. Clara was simultaneously impressed by the city's obvious prosperity and dismayed by the noise and crowds after the peaceful solitude of their journey. "Where do we go first?" "My sister's house," Abram decided. She and her husband can offer clean beds and advice on approaching the bank. Dr. Preston has patience among Denver's elite. He may know something about who's really behind this. Margaret Montgomery Preston proved to be exactly as Abram had described her: intelligent, forthright, and absolutely delighted to see her brother. She welcomed Clara with equal warmth once introductions were made. "Any friend of Abram's is welcome here," she declared, showing them into a comfortable home not far from the city center. "Especially one who's survived days of travel with his taciturn company." "I'm not taciturn," Abram protested. Margaret laughed. "You speak when necessary and not a word more." "It's a wonder Miss Norwood hasn't died of boredom." "On the contrary," Clara replied with a smile, "your brother has been an excellent guide and companion." Something in her tone made Margaret look between them with sudden interest, but she said nothing further on the subject. Instead, she called for refreshments and listened intently as Abram explained their situation. "Wesley Harker," she said when he finished, her expression grim. "That man is a snake. Edward has treated his wife for accidents twice now, falls that left bruises shaped suspiciously like handprints." "You think he's behind the bank's decision?" Clara asked. "I know he's involved with several bank directors socially," Margaret confirmed. "Edward has attended the same charity functions. Harker makes no secret of his ambition to control the largest cattle operation in the territory." "By destroying everyone else," Abram said bitterly. Dr. Preston arrived home shortly thereafter, a distinguished man in his 30s with kind eyes and a thoughtful manner. After hearing their story, he offered a valuable piece of information. "The bank's president, William Foster, is not aligned with Harker," he told them. "In fact, there's considerable tension between them. Foster believes in developing the territory through supporting small landowners, not consolidating power in the hands of a few wealthy operators." "Can you arrange a meeting with him?" Abram asked hopefully. "Better than that," Dr. Preston smiled. "He's hosting a reception tomorrow evening for potential investors in a new railroad spur. Margaret and I are invited, and now so are you." Clara's heart sank as she realized the implication. "I have nothing suitable to wear to such an event." Margaret waved away her concern. "We're of similar size. I have several gowns that should fit you perfectly." She gave Clara an appraising look. "In fact, I have a blue silk that would complement your coloring beautifully." The following evening found Clara standing before a mirror in Margaret's dressing room, hardly recognizing herself. The blue silk gown was more elegant than anything she had worn since before her parents' deaths, and Margaret had arranged her hair in a sophisticated style adorned with pearl pins. "You look stunning," Margaret declared, adjusting the drape of the skirt. "My brother won't know what hit him." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Montgomery Abram and I have a purely practical arrangement. He offered shelter when I needed it, and I helped manage his household in return." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Of course, purely practical. That explains why he can't take his eyes off you whenever you're in the room." "That's not," Clara began to protest, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Ladies," Dr. Preston called. "The carriage is ready, and Abram is wearing a path in our carpet with his pacing." When Clara descended the stairs, Abram's reaction seemed to confirm Margaret's observation. He stood motionless at the bottom, his eyes widening as he took in her transformation. For his part, Abram cut a striking figure in evening clothes borrowed from his brother-in-law, a far cry from the rugged rancher she had come to know. "You look." He began, then seemed to lose his train of thought. "Different," Clara suggested with a small smile. "Beautiful," he finished simply. "Though you always do." The honesty in his voice sent warmth flooding through her, and for a moment they stood gazing at each other as if seeing one another for the first time. Margaret cleared her throat pointedly. "If you two are quite finished admiring each other, we have a bank president to persuade." The reception was held at Foster's mansion, an imposing structure that showcased the prosperity brought by Denver's rapid growth. Inside, the city's elite mingled amid crystal chandeliers and imported furnishings. Clara felt a momentary return of her old insecurities as they entered this world of wealth and privilege, a world that had rejected her after her father's financial collapse. Abram seemed to sense her discomfort. He placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back as they followed the Prestons into the crowded reception room. "Remember," he murmured close to her ear, "you belong here as much as anyone." Dr. Preston soon located their host and made introductions. William Foster proved to be a shrewd-looking man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. "Montgomery Ranch," he said, recognition dawning. "Your father was James Montgomery, correct? I met him years ago when I first came to the territory. Impressive operation he built." "Thank you, sir," Abram replied. "I'm trying to preserve his legacy, which is why I've come to Denver." Foster nodded. "The loan situation, I presume. Several ranchers have approached me this week." He glanced around the crowded room. "This isn't the place for such a discussion. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp." As Foster moved on to greet other guests, Clara caught sight of a well-dressed man watching them from across the room with undisguised interest. "That's Harker," Margaret whispered, following her gaze. "And he doesn't look pleased to see you here." Wesley Harker was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 40, with the polished appearance of a successful businessman rather than the rough-edged criminal she had imagined. What made him unsettling was his expression, calculating and cold despite his social smile. "He's coming this way," Clara warned. Harker approached with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference. "Montgomery," he greeted Abram with artificial warmth. "What brings you to civilization?" "Cattle prices finally drive you to seek real employment." Abram's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Just visiting family, Harker, and reminding myself why I prefer the company of honest people on the ranch." Harker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Still clinging to that failing operation? Shame, I made you a generous offer." "Not interested," Abram stated flatly. "Not now, not ever." Harker's gaze shifted to Clara, assessing her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Surely not a product of ranch life." Before Abram could respond, Clara extended her hand with the practiced grace of her Boston upbringing. "Clara Norwood, a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Harker." "The pleasure is mine," Harker replied, holding her hand longer than propriety dictated. "You seem familiar, Miss Norwood. Have we met in Denver before?" "I've only just arrived from the east," she answered carefully. "Ah, a newcomer to our territory." His smile widened. "Perhaps you would do me the honor of a dance. I could tell you about the opportunities Denver offers to a woman of obvious refinement." Clara felt Abram tense beside her. She placed her hand on his arm in a gesture that could be interpreted as either restraint or affection. "Thank you, but I'm afraid I've already promised this dance to Mr. Montgomery," she replied smoothly. "Another time, perhaps." Harker's expression hardened briefly before he recovered his social mask. "Of course, another time." He nodded curtly to Abram Montgomery. As Harker walked away, Margaret let out a relieved breath. "Well handled, both of you." "Though, Abram, I thought you might strike him for a moment there." "The thought crossed my mind," Abram admitted, his eyes still following Harker across the room. Clara tugged gently on his arm. "I believe I was promised a dance, Mr. Montgomery." The tension in Abram's face softened as he looked down at her. "So you were, Miss Norwood." As they moved to the dance floor, Clara was surprised to discover that Abram moved with unexpected grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. "You dance well," she commented as he guided her expertly through a waltz. "My mother insisted," he explained with a small smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a startled buffalo, no matter how far from civilization we lived." Clara laughed, relaxing into his lead. "She sounds wonderful." She was. His hand at her waist drew her slightly closer than propriety strictly allowed. "Thank you for what you did with Harker. Your quick thinking probably prevented an incident that would have ruined our chances with Foster." "I simply said what seemed most expedient at the moment," Clara replied, trying to ignore the warmth that spread from where his hand rested. "Still, you were magnificent." His voice dropped lower for her ears alone. "You are magnificent, Clara Norwood." The sincerity in his words made her breath catch. As they circled the floor, the crowded room seemed to fade away until there was only Abram, his blue eyes holding hers, his strong hand steady at her waist. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Clara felt truly seen not for her social standing or practical value, but for herself. The music ended too soon, bringing her back to reality with jarring abruptness. They returned to where Margaret and Edward stood watching them with poorly concealed interest. "You two make quite the striking couple," Margaret observed innocently. "Don't they, Edward?" Dr. Preston nodded agreement. "Indeed, quite well matched." Clara felt her cheeks flush as Abram cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should circulate," he suggested. Foster mentioned investors for the railroad spur they might be worth meeting. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and strategic conversations. Clara found herself drawing on her experience as a banker's daughter, explaining the advantages of Montgomery Ranch's location relative to proposed railway routes. Several investors expressed genuine interest in the region's development, and one even suggested a potential solution to Abram's immediate financial crisis. "Private investment might be your answer," the gentleman advised. "If the bank won't extend your loan, find a silent partner who will. The territory is growing, and smart money knows that land like yours will only increase in value." By the time they returned to the Prestons' home, Clara was exhausted but optimistic. "I think we made valuable connections tonight," she told Abram as they stood in the hallway outside their respective rooms. "We did," he agreed, "though I doubt any will bear fruit in time to meet the bank's 30-day deadline." Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind throughout the evening. "Have you considered taking on a partner? Not Harker, obviously, but someone who shares your vision for the ranch." Abram's expression turned guarded. "My father built that ranch to be passed down through generations of Montgomerys. Bringing in a partner means losing some control, some of the legacy." "Not necessarily," Clara argued gently. "The right partner could help preserve that legacy rather than diminish it, like your parents did together." Something shifted in Abram's eyes, a realization or consideration that hadn't been there before. "Perhaps," he conceded, "though finding the right partner isn't simple." "No," Clara agreed softly, "it isn't." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Abram reached out and tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Thank you for coming with me," he said quietly. "I can't imagine facing this alone." Clara leaned slightly into his touch before she could stop herself. "We'll find a solution tomorrow, together." "Together," he repeated, the word carrying a weight beyond their immediate circumstances. With reluctance, he stepped back, breaking the moment of connection. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Abram." As she closed her door, Clara leaned against it, her heart racing. The practical arrangement they had agreed upon at the ranch seemed increasingly inadequate to describe what was developing between them. Yet she couldn't allow herself to misread the situation. Abram's concern was rightly focused on saving his ranch, not on romantic entanglements. Still, as she prepared for bed, Clara couldn't banish the memory of his hand warm against her waist, his eyes intent on hers as they danced. For the first time since arriving in Colorado territory, she allowed herself to imagine a future different from the independent one she had planned, a future that included Abram Montgomery and the land he loved so fiercely. The meeting with William Foster the next morning brought both hope and frustration. The bank president was sympathetic to Abram's situation, but constrained by institutional policies. "The directive came from the board of directors," Foster explained, seated behind his imposing desk. "I opposed it but was outvoted. Harker has cultivated several board members over the past year: dinners, gifts, investments in their personal ventures. So he is behind this, Abram concluded grimly. Foster nodded. I believe so, though it would be difficult to prove. His strategy is clear: force foreclosures, acquire land at auction for cents on the dollar, and build the largest cattle empire in the territory. There must be something you can do, Clara pressed. The Montgomery Ranch has never missed a payment. Calling in the full loan amount without warning is predatory banking. Foster studied her with new respect. You understand finance, Miss Norwood? My father was a banker in Boston, she explained. I grew up listening to discussions of ethical lending practices. Then you understand my position is delicate, Foster sighed. I can't officially extend the deadline without board approval. However, he paused thoughtfully. I could delay the paperwork. Administrative errors happen, especially when the bank is processing multiple foreclosures simultaneously. That might buy you an additional 2 weeks. 2 weeks isn't enough to raise the full amount, Abram pointed out. No, Foster agreed, but it might be enough time to secure alternative financing or find a partner willing to invest. He leaned forward. Montgomery Ranch borders the proposed route for the new railway spur. That makes your land particularly valuable, a fact Harker is undoubtedly aware of. The investor from last night mentioned private partnerships, Clara recalled. Do you know anyone who might be interested? Foster considered the question. Several possibilities come to mind. I'll make some discreet inquiries. He rose, indicating the meeting was concluding. I suggest you remain in Denver for a few days, network at every opportunity, and watch your backs. Harker doesn't take opposition lightly. As they left the bank, Clara could see the weight of worry on Abram's shoulders despite the small victory they'd achieved. 2 more weeks, he said quietly as they walked toward the Prestons' home. It's something, at least. It's enough time to find a solution, Clara insisted, trying to inject confidence into her voice. Between Foster's contacts and the connections we made last night, surely someone will see the value in partnering with you. Abram stopped walking and turned to face her. And if they don't? If I lose the ranch, the question hung between them, forcing Clara to consider what that loss would mean not just for Abram but for her as well. The ranch had become more than temporary shelter. It had become something close to home. Then you start over, she said finally. Like your father did after the flood. You're not alone, Abram. She hesitated before adding, you have people who care about you, who believe in you. His expression softened as he searched her face. Do I have you, Clara? The directness of the question took her breath away. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion down the street distracted them: raised voices and the sound of running feet. Fire, someone shouted. Fire at the Preston house. Abram's face drained of color. Margaret, he whispered, before breaking into a run toward the growing plume of smoke rising several blocks away. Clara gathered her skirts and ran after him, fear clutching at her heart. By the time they reached the Preston street, a crowd had gathered. The house was engulfed in flames, with volunteer firefighters attempting to control the blaze. Margaret, Abram called, pushing through the onlookers. Edward, Clara spotted Dr. Preston standing across the street, his face blackened with soot. Edward, she cried, rushing to him. Where's Margaret? At the hospital, he answered, his voice rough from smoke. She was seeing patients this morning, thank God. Abram joined them, relief washing over his features. What happened? I came home to retrieve a medical text, Doctor. Preston explained, watching helplessly as the firefighters battled the blaze. The fire started in my study, spread so fast there was nothing to be done. Was anything saved? Clara asked gently. Edward shook his head. Nothing of consequence, though the timing is suspicious. Abram's expression hardened. Harker. We can't prove anything, Dr. Preston cautioned. But yes, I suspect this is no coincidence. He saw you at the reception, knew you were staying with us. This is my fault, Abram said, anguish in his voice. I've brought this trouble to your doorstep. Nonsense, Edward replied firmly. If Harker is behind this, it's his crime, not yours. The question is what to do now. Clara placed a hand on Abram's arm. We need to leave Denver. Our presence is putting Margaret and Edward at risk. And go where? Abram asked. Back to the ranch with no solution. We only have 2 weeks before foreclosure. I may have an answer to both problems, Dr. Preston said quietly. Margaret and I have been considering a move to a growing community near Colorado Springs. My colleague there is overwhelmed with patients. This fire may simply be accelerating our plans. And the ranch, Clara pressed. Edward looked between them thoughtfully. I have some savings set aside for our relocation, not enough to pay off your loan entirely, Abram, but perhaps enough for a partnership stake. Between my investment and what Foster might arrange, you could satisfy the bank. Abram stared at his brother-in-law in disbelief. You do that, after what just happened? Family invests in family, Edward said simply. Margaret would never forgive me if I didn't try to help save her childhood home. Besides, he added with a small smile, I've always thought it might be nice to have a place to escape to when city life becomes too much. Hope flickered across Abram's face for the first time since receiving the telegram. A partnership, with family. We can discuss details later, Edward said, glancing back at the burning house. For now, we should find Margaret and make alternative arrangements for lodging. It's not safe for any of us to stay together tonight. They located Margaret at the hospital, distraught over the fire but relieved that no one had been injured. After a tearful reunion with her brother, she agreed with her husband's assessment. Harker is sending a message, she said grimly. He wants you to know he can reach you anywhere in Denver. They decided to separate for safety. Edward and Margaret would stay with hospital colleagues, while Abram and Clara would take rooms at different hotels under assumed names. They would meet the following day at Foster's bank to discuss financial arrangements. As evening fell, Clara found herself alone in a modest hotel room, her borrowed gown replaced with a simple dress purchased hastily that afternoon. A soft knock at her door startled her. Who is it? She called, approaching cautiously. Abram, came the quiet response. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his expression troubled. Is everything all right? She asked, stepping back to let him enter. No, he admitted as she closed the door behind him. I can't stop thinking about the fire, about what might have happened if Margaret had been home or if you had been there instead of with me. But we weren't, Clara reminded him gently. Everyone is safe. This time, Abram paced the small room restlessly. Harker isn't going to stop, Clara. Not until he gets what he wants. Then we have to be smarter than he is, she insisted. Edward's offer is generous. With his investment and Foster's connections, it's not about the money anymore, Abram interrupted, turning to face her. It's about you, about keeping you safe. Clara's breath caught at the intensity in his voice. Me, I brought you into this mess, he continued, moving closer. You came to help save the ranch, and now you're in danger because of it, because of me. I chose to come, she reminded him. I wanted to help. Why? He asked softly. Our arrangement was for you to manage the household, not risk your life battling bankers and arsonists. Why did you really come to Denver with me, Clara? The question hung between them, demanding an honesty she had been avoiding. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Because I care about the ranch, she began, then corrected herself. No, that's not entirely true. I care about you, Abram, more than I should, given our arrangement. Abram closed the remaining distance between them, reaching out to take her hands in his. And what if our arrangement changed? Changed how? She whispered, her heart racing. When you first came to the ranch, you asked for work. I said I needed a wife more than a worker. His voice was low, earnest. It wasn't entirely a joke, Clara. The ranch needs someone who loves it as much as I do, someone with roots and wings. Clara's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. Abram, I'm asking if you might consider staying, he interrupted, his gaze holding hers. Not as an employee, but as a partner, in every sense. We've known each other barely 6 weeks, she protested weakly, even as her heart leapt at his words. And in that time, you've transformed my home, charmed my sister, impressed a bank president, and shown more courage than most men I know, Abram replied. I'm not proposing marriage tonight, Clara. I'm asking if you might be open to the possibility of a future together, one where we face whatever comes as partners. Clara studied his face, seeing hope and vulnerability and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. 6 weeks ago, she had arrived in Colorado territory seeking independence. Now she was considering binding her future to a man and a piece of land she had never imagined in her carefully constructed plans. Yet the thought filled her not with constraint but with possibility. "I came west to find where I belong," she said slowly, "to plant my roots somewhere of my own choosing." She squeezed his hands. "I think perhaps I have found that place and that person." The smile that broke across Abram's face was like sunrise over the mountains. "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe," Clara clarified, though she couldn't suppress her own smile. "A maybe with promising potential, contingent on us actually saving the ranch and surviving Harker's machinations." Abram laughed, the sound lighting something warm within her. "I can work with a maybe." His expression grew serious again as he reached up to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Clara Norwood?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Abram's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Clara felt as though something long sleeping within her had finally awakened, responding to his touch with a passion she hadn't known she possessed. When they finally parted, both breathless, Abram rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Before I forget myself entirely," Clara nodded, equally reluctant to end their embrace. "Tomorrow we meet with Foster and Edward. We need clear heads. And afterward we return to the ranch," Abram added. "Whatever happens with the bank, I want to face it on my own land." "Our land," Clara corrected softly. "If we're to be partners." The joy that lit his eyes at her words was answer enough. With one last, lingering kiss, Abram departed, leaving Clara to touch her lips in wonder at how completely her life had changed in the span of a single day. The following morning brought unexpected news. When they met at Foster's bank, the president greeted them with barely contained excitement. "I've been in contact with several potential investors," he told them, "but the most promising is a gentleman from Chicago who's been looking to diversify into Western cattle operations. He's prepared to offer enough to cover your loan and provide additional capital for expansion." Abram looked skeptical. "What's the catch?" "He wants a 30% stake in the ranch and a say in major operational decisions," Foster admitted, "but you would remain the managing partner with day-to-day control." "That's a significant portion to surrender," Abram observed. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "But you would keep the ranch with resources to improve it. Consider what you could do with additional capital, better breeding stock, improved water management, perhaps even that small processing operation you mentioned once." Abram covered her hand with his own, the gesture intimate enough to draw a raised eyebrow from Foster. "You're right, it's better than losing everything." "There's more," Foster continued. "This investor specifically mentioned interest in your property because of its proximity to the proposed railway spur. He believes, as do I, that Harker's aggressive land acquisition is related to inside information about the final route." "Meaning?" Edward asked. "Meaning Harker likely knows something we don't about which properties will increase in value once the route is announced," Foster explained. "He's not just building a cattle empire, he's positioning himself to profit from railway development." Clara's mind raced with the implications. "That would explain his particular interest in Montgomery Ranch, if the railway is planning to cross that land." "Exactly," Foster nodded, "which makes your property even more valuable than Harker has let on. My investor friend is willing to move quickly. He can have the funds transferred by week's end." "That's remarkable timing," Abram said cautiously. "Indeed," Foster agreed. "I took the liberty of sending him detailed information about your operation yesterday. He was immediately interested." As they left the bank an hour later, paperwork in hand for Abram to review, Clara could sense his mixed emotions. "You're troubled," she observed as they walked toward the hotel where they were to meet Margaret and Edward for lunch. "Grateful but cautious," Abram corrected. "This solution seems almost too perfect." "Perhaps we were due for some good fortune," Clara suggested. Edward and Margaret were already waiting when they arrived. After sharing Foster's news, they discussed the logistics of the Prestons' relocation and their smaller investment in the ranch. "This Chicago investor sounds promising," Margaret said, "though I share Abram's caution." "Have you verified his credentials?" "Foster is doing so today," Abram confirmed. If everything checks out, we could have this resolved by the time we return to the ranch." "Speaking of which," Edward interjected, "I believe you should leave Denver immediately. The fire was clearly a warning. Next time, Harker might take more direct action." "I agree," Clara said. "We've accomplished what we came for. There's no reason to remain and risk further confrontation." Abram nodded reluctantly. "We'll depart this afternoon. Can you manage the paperwork with Foster, Edward?" "Of course. Margaret and I will follow in a few weeks once our arrangements here are complete." They said their goodbyes with promises to write, and by mid-afternoon, Clara and Abram were on the road leading out of Denver, mounted on fresh horses purchased that morning. "It feels good to be heading home," Abram remarked as the city receded behind them, home. The word resonated with Clara in a way it hadn't before. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It does." They made good time that afternoon, stopping at a different roadhouse than the one they had visited on their journey to Denver. As they ate a simple meal in the establishment's dining room, Clara noticed Abram watching the door each time it opened. "You're expecting trouble," she observed. "Hoping for the best, prepared for the worst," he corrected, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "Harker knows we're leaving Denver. This road is the most direct route back to the ranch." Clara felt a chill despite the warm evening. "Do you think he would try something so publicly?" "I think he's desperate to prevent us from succeeding," Abram replied. "That makes him dangerous." They retired early, taking adjacent rooms as propriety dictated, though Abram insisted on checking Clara's room thoroughly before allowing her to enter. "Lock the door," he instructed, "and push that chair under the handle for good measure. I'll be right next door. If you need anything, just knock on the wall." Clara did as he suggested, then prepared for bed with an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. Sleep came fitfully, disturbed by every creak of the old building and muffled voice from the taproom below. She had just drifted into deeper sleep when a sound jerked her fully awake, the soft scrape of something at her window. Frozen in fear, Clara watched as the latch slowly moved, the window beginning to rise. Without hesitation, she struck the wall separating her room from Abram's 3 times, their agreed-upon signal for danger. Then she grabbed the water pitcher from her washstand and positioned herself beside the window, heart pounding. A dark figure began to climb through the opening. As soon as the intruder's head and shoulders were inside, Clara brought the heavy pitcher down with all her strength. There was a grunt of pain, followed by the sound of a body falling back outside. The door to her room burst open an instant later, Abram appearing with revolver drawn. "Clara." "The window," she gasped, backing away from the opening. Someone was climbing in. Abram crossed to the window in 2 strides, peering out cautiously. "He's gone, but there's blood on the sill." A commotion arose from below as the innkeeper and several guests responded to the disturbance. Within minutes, Abram had organized a search of the surrounding area, though the would-be intruder had vanished into the night. "You're not staying alone again," Abram declared when they were finally left in privacy, the innkeeper having departed with profuse apologies and promises of improved security. "We'll ride through the night if necessary." "That's not practical," Clara argued, though she was still shaking from the encounter. "We need rest, and so do the horses." Abram ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Then I'll sleep in your room in the chair by the door." Clara knew she should object on grounds of propriety, but the thought of being alone after what had happened was more frightening than any potential scandal. "All right," she agreed. Neither of them slept much for what remained of the night. At first light, they departed, pushing their horses harder than before in their eagerness to put distance between themselves and potential pursuers. They avoided towns and known stopping points, taking a less direct route that Abram assured her would eventually lead them home. On the 3rd day, as they made camp in a secluded grove near a small stream, Clara finally felt the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. "We should reach the ranch by tomorrow afternoon," Abram told her as they prepared a simple meal over a small fire, "assuming we maintain our pace." "And assuming no further interference from Harker's men," Clara added, glancing nervously at the darkening forest around them. Abram moved to sit beside her, placing a reassuring arm around her shoulders. We've seen no sign of pursuit since leaving the roadhouse. I think we've lost them by taking this route. Clara leaned into his embrace, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I can't help wondering what awaits us at the ranch. What if Harker has sent men there while we've been away? Frank and the boys would never let anyone harm the place, Abram assured her. And we'll have good news when we arrive, financing secured, the threat of foreclosure removed. Assuming the Chicago investor's offer is legitimate, Clara reminded him. Even if it falls through, we have Edward's contribution and Foster's extended deadline, Abram pointed out. We've bought time, if nothing else. Clara nodded, trying to share his optimism. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the small fire. When we return, Abram said finally, his voice quiet in the growing darkness, things will be different. Clara looked up at him questioningly. Different how? Between us, he clarified, meeting her gaze. If you still feel as you did in Denver, if your maybe still stands, I'd like to court you properly. Clara Norwood. No pretense of employer and employee, just a man and a woman discovering if they suit each other. Despite the dangers they had faced and the uncertainties still ahead, Clara felt a bloom of happiness at his words. I'd like that, she replied softly. Though I warn you, I'm still determined to be more than just someone's wife. I want to contribute to build something meaningful. I would expect nothing less, Abram assured her, his eyes warm in the firelight. The ranch needs your intelligence and vision as much as it needs my experience. True partnership, remember. He leaned down to kiss her then, a gentle affirmation of his words that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Clara responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck as she pressed closer. It was Abram who finally pulled away, his breathing uneven. We should rest, he said reluctantly. Tomorrow will be a long day. Though sleeping apart was difficult, they maintained the propriety their uncertain situation demanded. Morning found them both eager to complete their journey, packing their meager camp quickly and setting off at a brisk pace. As the familiar landscape of Montgomery Ranch came into view that afternoon, Clara felt a surge of emotion she hadn't anticipated: relief, joy, and a profound sense of homecoming that took her by surprise. Welcome home, Abram said softly, noticing her expression as they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch buildings. It's good to be back, she replied, realizing how true those words had become in such a short time. They rode down toward the main house, where their arrival created an immediate stir. Ranch hands called out greetings, and Mrs. Diaz appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried to meet them. Thank the Lord you're back safely, she exclaimed as they dismounted. We've been worried sick since your telegram arrived. Telegram? Abram asked sharply. We sent no telegram. Mrs. Diaz looked confused. It came 3 days ago saying you were returning and to expect trouble following you. Abram and Clara exchanged alarmed glances. Where's Frank? Abram demanded. Out by the north pasture with most of the men, Mrs. Diaz replied. They've been keeping watch in shifts since the telegram came. Get inside and lock the doors, Abram instructed, helping Clara down from her horse. Clara, go with Mrs. Diaz. I need to find Frank and understand what's happening. I'm coming with you, Clara insisted. We don't know what we're facing, and I won't be separated from you now. Abram looked as though he might argue, but the determination in her face must have convinced him. Stay close, he conceded, turning to Mrs. Diaz. Alert the remaining men. Tell them to arm themselves and watch for riders approaching from the east. As Mrs. Diaz hurried to comply, Abram led Clara toward the stables, where they quickly transferred to fresh horses. Someone wanted us to come directly back to the ranch, Clara said as they rode toward the north pasture. The question is, was it a warning from a friend or a trap set by Harker? Either way, we're riding into it with our eyes open, Abram replied grimly. They found Frank and 4 ranch hands positioned along a ridgeline overlooking the approach to the ranch from the north. The foreman's weathered face showed clear relief at the sight of them. Boss, Miss Norwood, thank God you're all right. What's happening, Frank? Abram demanded as they reined in beside him. Mrs. Diaz mentioned a telegram. Frank nodded, his expression grave. Came from Denver 3 days ago, said you two were heading home and Harker's men might be following, told us to be on guard." He paused. "Wasn't from you then?" "No," Abram confirmed, "but someone knew our movements and wanted to warn you." "Foster, perhaps," Clara suggested, "or Edward and Margaret, possibly," Abram agreed, though how they knew we might be followed. He was interrupted by a shout from one of the ranch hands positioned further along the ridge. "Riders coming, at least 6, moving fast from the east," Frank handed Abram a spyglass. "Take Miss Norwood back to the house," he advised. "We'll handle this." Abram studied the approaching riders through the glass, his expression hardening. "That's Harker himself in the lead," he said quietly. "This isn't a random pursuit, he's coming specifically for us." He lowered the glass, his decision made. "We make our stand here, Clara, ride back to the house. Now." "No," she refused firmly. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You said it yourself, we're partners." Their eyes met in a moment of silent communication, his concerned, hers resolute. Finally, Abram nodded. "Stay behind me, then." The approaching riders slowed as they neared the ridge, clearly spotting the reception committee waiting for them. Harker raised a hand, bringing his men to a halt just within shouting distance. "Montgomery," he called, "we need to talk." "Nothing to discuss, Harker," Abram shouted back. "You're trespassing on private property." "I have information you need to hear," Harker insisted. "About your Chicago investor." Clara felt a chill at his words. How could Harker know about their arrangement with Foster? Abram seemed equally disturbed by the implication. "What about him?" He called, caution evident in his voice. "He doesn't exist," Harker replied. "Foster invented him to buy time. Check the credentials, there is no Thomas Baxter of Chicago investing in Colorado cattle operations." Clara's heart sank at the ring of truth in Harker's claim. Foster had been remarkably vague about the investor's background, and the offer had indeed seemed too perfect. "Why would you tell us this?" Abram demanded suspiciously. "Because I want to make you a new offer," Harker answered. "A legitimate one, face to face, just you and me, Montgomery, unarmed." Frank shook his head warningly. "Don't trust him, boss. This smells like a trap." Abram's jaw tightened as he considered their options. "Cover me," he instructed quietly. "If anything happens, get Clara out of here." Before Clara could protest, he had nudged his horse forward, moving down the slope toward where Harker waited. After a moment's hesitation, Harker did the same, leaving his men behind. The two men met in the open ground between their respective groups, both dismounting to stand face to face. Though too distant to hear their conversation, Clara could see their body language, Abram tense and defensive, Harker animated as he spoke. "What do you think they're saying?" she asked Frank anxiously. The foreman shrugged. "Can't say for sure. But I know the boss won't sell, no matter what Harker offers." Clara wasn't so certain. If Foster's investor was indeed fictitious, their financial situation remained desperate. With the bank's deadline looming and only Edward's smaller contribution secured, Abram might have to consider options he would previously have rejected. After what seemed an eternity, the two men remounted their horses and returned to their respective groups. Abram's expression was unreadable as he rejoined them on the ridge. "Well," Frank prompted. "Harker claims Foster invented the Chicago investor to prevent him from acquiring the ranch immediately," Abram reported. "Says he has proof the man doesn't exist, and his offer," Clara asked quietly. Abram's eyes met hers. "Full payment of the bank loan plus 20% above market value for the ranch. He wants an answer by tomorrow noon." Frank whistled softly. "That's generous, too generous." "Exactly," Abram agreed. "He's desperate to acquire this land before something happens." The railway announcement, Clara realized suddenly. What if it's imminent? What if that's why he can't wait for the foreclosure process to run its course? Abram nodded slowly. That would explain his urgency and his unexpected generosity. "So what now?" Frank asked. "Now we ride back to the house and consider our options," Abram decided. "Harker has agreed to withdraw for the night. He'll return tomorrow for my answer." As they rode back to the ranch buildings, Clara's mind raced with possibilities and concerns. If Foster had indeed fabricated the Chicago investor, their position was precarious. Yet Harker's unexpected offer suggested the ranch's value might be greater than they knew. I need to send a telegram to Foster, Abram said as they dismounted at the stables. And to Edward. If Harker is lying about the investor, they can confirm it. The nearest telegraph office is in Silver Creek, Frank reminded him. 10 miles each way. I'll go immediately, one of the younger ranch hands volunteered. As darkness fell, the ranch settled into an uneasy vigilance. Extra men were posted as sentries, though Abram believed Harker would honor his word to wait until the following day. In the privacy of the study, Abram and Clara discussed their options with Frank, considering every angle of their predicament. If the Chicago investor is real, we proceed as planned, Abram reasoned. If not, we need an alternative before noon tomorrow. Could Edward increase his investment? Clara suggested. Abram shook his head. Not significantly. He's already committing most of his savings. What about Foster himself? Frank proposed. He seemed eager to prevent Harker from acquiring more property. Possible, but unlikely on such short notice, Abram replied, and we don't know if we can trust him given Harker's claims. Clara had been quiet for several minutes, an idea forming in her mind that both excited and terrified her. There is another option, she said finally, one we haven't considered. Both men looked at her expectantly. My mother's locket, she began, touching the piece of jewelry she always wore. It contains a small key. When my father's investments failed, he gave my mother a strongbox to hide one the creditors never found. Abram's brow furrowed. What are you saying, Clara? I'm saying there may be enough to pay off your loan, she continued. Bonds and securities that remained untouched after my parents' deaths. I never mentioned them because I was saving them for my boarding house dream. Clara, no, Abram protested immediately. That's your future, your independence. I can't ask you to sacrifice that. You're not asking, she pointed out. I'm offering, as a partner would. The implications of her offer hung in the air between them. This wasn't just financial assistance, it was a commitment to the ranch and to Abram himself. Where is this strongbox? Frank asked practically. In Boston, with my father's former law partner, Clara explained. He's held it in trust, not knowing about the key. A telegram with specific wording would authorize him to access the contents and wire the funds. Abram rose from his chair and moved to the window, his back to them as he struggled with the decision. Even if this is possible, he said finally, turning to face Clara, I won't accept unless certain conditions are met. What conditions? She asked. First, it would be an investment, not a gift. You would receive a formal partnership stake in the ranch equal to your contribution. His eyes held hers intently. Second, if at any point you decide ranch life isn't what you want, I will ensure your investment is returned in full, even if I have to sell part of the land to do so. Clara was moved by his determination to protect her interests, even at potential cost to himself. Those terms are acceptable, she agreed, though I doubt I'll ever want to leave. The certainty in her voice caused something to shift in Abram's expression, hope mingling with another emotion that made her heart beat faster. There's one more thing, he said quietly, crossing to stand before her. If we do this, if we truly become partners in the ranch, I want to be clear about my intentions. He took her hands in his. I'm falling in love with you, Clara Norwood. Have been since you faced down bandits your first day in Colorado territory. Any partnership between us would be with the hope of a future together, not just as business associates. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes at his honest declaration. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said you needed a wife more than a worker, she admitted with a watery smile, though I was too stubborn to recognize it then. Frank cleared his throat pointedly. I'll just go check on the sentries, he mumbled, excusing himself from what had become a deeply personal moment. Alone in the study, Abram drew Clara into his arms. Are you certain about this, about us, about investing your future here? I've never been more certain of anything, she replied, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. The kiss was a promise of partnership, of commitment, of a future neither had imagined when Clara first arrived at Montgomery Ranch seeking employment. When they parted, Abram rested his forehead against hers. We should draft that telegram, he said reluctantly, and another to Foster demanding the truth about our Chicago investor. And then we wait, Clara agreed, and then we face Harker, Abram corrected, together. The following morning dawned clear and bright, belying the tension that had settled over the ranch. The messenger had returned from Silver Creek late the previous night with a surprising telegram from Foster. The Chicago investor was indeed real, though Foster had embellished certain details to expedite the arrangement. The funds would be transferred within 3 days. Clara had sent her own telegram to Boston, knowing it might be their only sure salvation if Foster's assurances proved false. As noon approached, Abram gathered his men in front of the main house. Clara stood beside him, her presence a statement in itself about her position at the ranch. "Whatever happens," Abram told them, "this land remains Montgomery Ranch. You've all worked hard to build something here, and I won't surrender that legacy without a fight." The men responded with nods and murmurs of agreement. They were loyal to Abram, and to the ranch itself. Many had worked there since his father's time. The sound of approaching horses announced Harker's arrival. He rode at the head of a smaller group than the previous day. Just 3 men accompanied him as he approached the house. "Montgomery," he greeted, dismounting with affected casualness. "Miss Norwood." His eyes lingered on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Have you considered my offer?" "I have," Abram replied evenly. "The answer is no." Harker's facade of pleasantness slipped momentarily. "You're making a mistake. The bank will foreclose in less than 3 weeks. This is your only chance to leave with something." "Actually, it isn't," Abram countered. "We've secured alternative financing. The loan will be paid in full before the deadline." Harker's expression darkened. "Foster's mythical Chicago investor, I told you that was a fiction." "We have confirmation it's quite real," Clara interjected. "The funds are being transferred as we speak." "You're bluffing," Harker accused, his composure cracking further. "Foster admitted to me himself there is no investor." "Then why are you so desperate to buy the ranch now?" Abram challenged. "Why not simply wait for foreclosure if you're so certain it's inevitable?" Harker's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Because I'm a businessman who recognizes value, and this property will be mine one way or another." "Is that a threat, Harker?" Frank stepped forward, hand resting near his holstered revolver. Harker glanced at the armed ranch hands surrounding him, apparently reconsidering his approach. "Not at all," he said, his tone smoothing into something more diplomatic. "Merely a prediction based on financial reality, but I can see you need more time to come to your senses." He remounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "My offer remains open for 3 more days. After that, you'll get nothing but the satisfaction of knowing I'll own this land anyway just a few weeks later than planned." With that parting shot, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. "You think he believed us about the investor?" Frank asked once they were out of earshot. "No," Abram admitted, "but he's not certain we're bluffing either. That gives us time." The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity as they prepared for all contingencies. Clara threw herself into ranch operations with renewed determination, working alongside Abram to ensure everything ran smoothly despite the looming threat. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a rider approached from Silver Creek, not one of Harker's men, but the banker's son delivering an urgent telegram. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope, Abram watching with barely concealed anxiety as she read its contents. "It's from Boston," she announced, relief flooding her voice. "The funds have been released. They'll arrive at the Silver Creek Bank tomorrow morning." Abram let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "And Foster's investor?" Clara shook her head. "No word yet." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Abram took Clara's hand in his. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that even if Foster's investor comes through and we don't need your funds, what you were willing to sacrifice means everything to me." Clara squeezed his hand. "It wasn't a sacrifice, it was an investment in this land, in this life." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "In us." Abram's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I like the sound of that, us." He leaned closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. of a future they would build together on the land they both had come to love. The following morning, they rode to Silver Creek together to complete the financial arrangements. To their surprise, a telegram from Foster awaited them at the bank. The Chicago investor had indeed transferred the full amount needed to satisfy the loan. So we have a choice, Abram realized as they stood in the banker's office. Accept the investor's terms or use your funds and maintain complete control of the ranch. Clara considered the options carefully. The investor wants 30% and input on major decisions, correct? Abram nodded, according to Foster's original terms. And my funds would cover the loan but leave little for improvements, Clara continued thoughtfully. What if we did both? Accept the investor's funds for the loan and use mine for the improvements. The ranch desperately needs the new better breeding stock, perhaps even that small processing operation you mentioned. Abram's expression brightened as he grasped her suggestion. A compromise. We accept some outside influence but maintain majority control while still having capital for growth. Exactly, Clara smiled. Roots and wings, remember? The banker watched their exchange with poorly concealed interest. Have you reached a decision? Abram looked to Clara, his expression making it clear he considered this their decision, not his alone. At her nod, he turned back to the banker. We accept the investment from Chicago with the terms as outlined by Mr. Foster. And we'd like to open a separate account for additional funds that will be arriving from Boston. As they completed the paperwork that would secure the ranch's future, Clara felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what she had come west seeking, though she hadn't known it at the time, not just independence but purpose. A place where her contributions mattered, where she could build something lasting and someone to build it with. The ride back to the ranch seemed lighter somehow, the burden of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders. As they crested the ridge overlooking the property, Abram reined his horse to a stop, Clara doing the same beside him. It looks different now, he observed, gazing across the land that had been his family's for 2 generations. How so? Clara asked. Fuller of possibility, he replied. When I was focused solely on survival, on preserving what my father built, I couldn't see beyond the next crisis. Now I can imagine what this place could become. Clara followed his gaze, seeing not just what was before them, but what could be orchards in the sheltered valley, expanded grazing lands, perhaps even a proper garden surrounding the main house. We should celebrate, she suggested. Invite the men for a special dinner. They've stood by us through everything. Abram smiled at her use of us and we small words that represented an enormous shift in their relationship. Mrs. Diaz would enjoy the challenge of a celebration meal, he agreed. And I have something I'd like to discuss with everyone. That evening, the main house buzzed with activity as ranch hands gathered for the promised celebration. Mrs. Diaz outdid herself, preparing a feast that had the men talking appreciatively between mouthfuls. As the meal concluded, Abram rose from his place at the head of the table, calling for attention. Clara watched him with curiosity, unsure what announcement he planned to make. First, he began, I want to thank all of you for your loyalty these past difficult weeks. This ranch stands today because of your efforts. Murmurs of acknowledgement circulated among the men. Second, I want to officially introduce someone who has become essential to Montgomery Ranch. He extended his hand toward Clara. Miss Norwood came to us seeking employment and instead has become a true partner in this operation. Her financial investment and vision for the future have secured our survival and will guide our growth. Clara felt her cheeks warm at the public recognition, especially as the men nodded approvingly. Frank even offered a brief "Hear, hear." That brought a smile to her face. Finally, Abram continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone, I have an announcement of a different nature. He turned to face Clara directly. Miss Norwood, Clara, when you first arrived, I made a poor joke about needing a wife more than a worker. It wasn't entirely a joke then, and it certainly isn't now. Clara's breath caught as she realized what was happening. Around the table, the men fell silent, watching with undisguised interest. Abram moved to stand before her, then to her astonishment, knelt on one knee. Clara Norwood, these past weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, intelligent, determined, and compassionate. The ranch needs you. I need you. He took her hand in his. Will you marry me, Clara? Will you be my partner in every sense in this land, in this life, in building a future together? Tears blurred Clara's vision as she looked into the face of the man who had rescued her from bandits, offered her sanctuary when she had nothing, and now was offering her everything she had come west hoping to find: purpose, belonging, and love. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly. Yes, Abram Montgomery, I will marry you. The room erupted in cheers and applause as Abram rose to his feet, drawing Clara into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership and passion. Mrs. Diaz wiped tears from her eyes, while Frank led the men in a toast to the future of Montgomery Ranch and its soon-to-be expanded family. Later that evening, when the celebration had wound down and they found themselves alone on the porch, Clara leaned against Abram's shoulder, contentment washing over her. When I first arrived here, she mused, I never imagined this would be my fate. Disappointed? Abram asked, a touch of playfulness in his voice. Quite the opposite, she assured him. I came west seeking independence and found something better: interdependence, a partnership where we're both stronger together than apart. Abram's arm tightened around her shoulders. Like your roots and wings analogy. Exactly, Clara agreed. You provide the stability I've been searching for since losing my parents, and perhaps I bring a fresh perspective that helps the ranch grow beyond mere survival. You bring far more than that, Abram corrected gently. You bring life and laughter back to this place. You make it a home again. As they sat together watching the stars emerge above the mountains, Clara reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. Her stagecoach had been attacked, her plans derailed, her very life endangered, yet without those setbacks, she might never have found her true destiny. Do you remember what you said when we first met? She asked. About the West changing people's plans, Abram chuckled. I believe I've been proven right. Indeed you have, Clara agreed, turning to face him, and I couldn't be happier about it. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their future, a future neither had anticipated when Clara's voice had shaken as she asked for work, and Abram had replied that he needed a wife more than a worker. What had begun as a joke had become their truth, their partnership, their love story written across the vast canvas of the West. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Clara Norwood became Clara Montgomery in a ceremony held on the ranch that had brought them together. Margaret and Edward returned for the occasion, bringing news of their own expected child and plans to visit regularly. The small church in Silver Creek couldn't contain all who wished to attend, not just the ranch hands and neighboring families, but townspeople who had witnessed the couple's determination to save Montgomery Ranch from Harker's machinations. The banker himself had left the territory shortly after their financial victory, his schemes exposed by Foster in a detailed report to territorial authorities. As Clara stood beside Abram exchanging vows, she wore her mother's locket, the key to her past that had helped unlock her future. Her wedding band was fashioned from gold mined in the mountains visible from their bedroom window, a constant reminder of the land that had brought them together. I take you, Clara Norwood, to be my wife and partner, Abram promised, his voice steady and sure. To build with you a legacy of love and prosperity on this land we both cherish. I take you, Abram Montgomery, to be my husband and partner, Clara responded, her heart full to overflowing. To bring wings to your roots and to create with you a home where dreams can flourish. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting that reflected the ranch's renewed prosperity. The Chicago investor, who proved to be a shrewd but fair partner, sent an extravagant wedding gift, along with news of the railway spur's approved route, which would indeed pass near enough to Montgomery Ranch to increase its value substantially. As Clara and Abram danced beneath lanterns strung across the yard, she caught glimpses of their future in the faces surrounding them, Mrs. Diaz beaming with maternal pride, Frank raising a glass in silent toast, Margaret and Edward watching with knowing smiles. Happy? Abram asked softly, guiding her through the steps of a waltz far from the formal ballrooms of Boston. Clara looked up at the man who had transformed her understanding of independence and partnership, of strength and vulnerability. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. And everything I needed without realizing it," Abram replied, drawing her closer than propriety might allow, though, as his wife, such concerns were finally behind them. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the main house now truly their home, Abram pointed to a star shining particularly brightly above the mountains. "My father used to say that star marks the heart of the ranch," he told her, "that as long as it shines, Montgomery land will prosper." Clara leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "Then we'll make sure it always has reason to shine brightly." "We will," Abram agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Together." As they turned to enter their home, Clara reflected that her journey west had brought her not just to a place, but to a person and a purpose that completed her in ways she had never imagined possible. Her voice had shaken that day she asked for work, uncertain of her future and her place in this wild territory. Now her voice was steady and sure, her heart full, her path clear. Montgomery Ranch would thrive under their joint stewardship roots, and wings working in perfect harmony to create a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And at its heart would always be the unexpected love story of a Boston banker's daughter and a Colorado rancher who discovered that sometimes fate's detours lead exactly where we're meant to be.